This story depends on a particular emotional perception. There's a sense of loss bordering on dismay about the indifference of the contemporary world to the past. There's the perception of a sort of subtle pressure. Do not lose us. Do not forget us, those who have gone before. For without us, how can you know who you are?
In 1532, at the dawn of modern history, darkness engulfed an entire continent. Within days, the largest empire of the time crumbled when 170 ragged desperados, Spanish conquerors in search of gold, blundered on the scene. The stunning collapse of the empire of the Incas is a tale of horror. Its end was heralded by fatal prophecies and strange despair.
When I first began to study the history of the Inca Empire, I was surprised to learn that it had existed for less than a century before being utterly destroyed by the Spanish conquistadores. More startling still were the genuinely peculiar circumstances surrounding the demise of this great empire. I remember thinking when I first read of these events, how could this be? One's accustomed to thinking of destiny as somehow more subtle. In the end, I would learn that the destiny of the Incas was written in the stars.
By day, in the thin air of highland Peru and Bolivia, there vibrates a song of inconsolate sadness. From crumbling terraces on endless abandoned hillsides to the desolation of the Altiplano, the injured earth cries out for her lost husbandsman. She is Pachamama, Mother Earth. Of her 7 million children who witnessed the Spaniards come, 6 million lay dead after the conquest. The survivors, the salt of the earth who have endured through centuries the degradation, disdain and suffering of cataclysm, have never forgotten her.
Much of what we know about the Inca Empire comes to us from the Spanish chroniclers of the conquest. The Incas themselves did not possess the art of writing, and so many have come to conclude that they had only the vaguest notion of their own history. But nothing could be further from the truth, because to set their story adrift on the river of time, the Incas fashioned their own vessel, myth.
This idea is controversial. Are there more ways to knowing who we were? Ruins and shards of pottery may show the steady advance of man from cave onto condominium, but what do they say about ideas? There are those who think our forefathers may have been more and different from what conventional science and established archaeology are prepared to consider.
Weil sie prinzipiell nach unten gucken. Seit mindestens 100 Jahren nehmen unsere sämtlichen Gelehrten unsere fernen Vorfahren für Schimpansen. Passen Sie auf, die haben alle den Fehler gemacht, als der Darwin mit seiner wunderbaren Evolution kam. Da haben sie gewusst, da brauchen wir, an dieses Schiff brauchen wir unser kleines Boot nur anzuhängen. Dann fährt das weiter. Aber die Evolution, die ist einzig gemeint auf die Evolution der Organismen. Aber wir sind ja, ich meine, unsere Vorfahren sind ja keine Amöben.
10 years ago, Herta von Dechend wrote a book showing our distant forefathers had stunning knowledge of astronomy, hidden and encoded in ancient myths preserved throughout the ages, knowledge ignored.
What's at issue here is the entire history of civilization. It may not have gone in a straight line from stupid old cavemen to smart old us with our hydrogen bombs and our striped toothpaste.
John West used geology, astronomy and myth to discover that the Giza Sphinx must be thousands of years older than thought so far.
There's a growing feeling among a number of people and scholars that the past is far more interesting and the people of the past far more sophisticated in their knowledge than we have known before. And One of the places where they placed their knowledge and placed their emphasis of study was in the night sky. And it's a peculiar coincidence of the time that we live in that our ability to recapture this information is greatly enhanced by the possibilities given to us by digital computers.
In myths, Bill Sullivan detects a precision of knowledge and ideas every bit as sophisticated as the Inca stonework. Surprising insights in astronomy, paralyzing prophecies, keys to the mystery of how a mighty empire fell to a handful of gold-hungry marauders. 5 years before, the last true Inca, in his dying breath, had already declared the empire lost. Did this cause the strange paralysis of the Incas in the face of Spanish conquerors? The Andes, enigmatic in so many ways, let's start on a quest for some of its secrets. Some we know thanks to this ancient German woman and the desert plains she preserved for posterity. Here in her last days, the late Maria Reiche and the wonder that is Nazca.
All in a dream, all in a dream.
Here lies a desert covered with huge lines and figures drawn long ago.
Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun.
Their meaning is elusive but must tie in with astronomy. They bear witness to a different magical view of the world, the cosmos and its powers. For centuries, these images remained mute and undetected, because on the ground they're virtually invisible. Only from the air do they speak. Their monkey stood for the yearly arrival of water, the miracle of life for these desert people, announced by the appearance of a constellation for which the image was the symbol. A huge fortress towers above Cusco, ancient capital of the Incas. It forms the head of a puma, with a city below as its body, a layout visible only from the skies above. If the world thinks the Nazca Desert is unique, it may be in for a surprise. Solstice Day is when the sun is either northernmost or southernmost, in June or December. June 21st, the solstice sun lights up the mountains round the Valle Sagrada, holy valley of the Incas. Here, Peruvian researcher Elorieta found a pyramid with a basis 28 times larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza, yet designed to remain unseen. The lines on it mark the solstices of June and December and the equinoxes, March 21 and September 21. The pyramid can be seen from the mountains only.
Aquí de ninguna manera es posible comprender que estamos sobre probablemente la pirámide más grande del mundo. Esta es la ventana donde ingresa la luz del sol en el amanecer de junio 21. Es un inmenso reloj de sol y de la eternidad. Los andinos no tratan de dominar a la naturaleza, sino de vivir en total armonía con una de las geografías más diversas del mundo. Lo fundamental fue crear, diseñar testimonios que vincularan al hombre con el cosmos. Y solo las personas especializadas, no las personas profanas, podían comprenderla.
Secrets for an elite of priests and nobles. On June 21st, they gathered here to see the shape of a puma appear in the solstice sun, and only in the solstice sun, till the Spanish lopped its head off. Solstice Day, June 21st. Only on this day the rising sun shapes the face of a puma emerging. On the December solstice, it cuts it precisely in half. Indicators of time, mastery of which was vital for survival in the harsh valleys of the Andes from the very dawn of history. For eons, the Andes was only capable of supporting sparse bands of hunters. Crops grew precariously on dazzling altitudes through long droughts or killing frosts. The Amazon jungles choke it from one side, the ocean and the world's driest desert from the others.
In about 200 BC, a creative impulse of enormous power entered into Andean life. Everywhere, a critical mass of people assembled who could undertake the task of terracing and irrigating the Andes. In the harsh conditions of the Andes, agriculture requires a tremendous communal effort, a willingness to help rather than to hate, an understanding that one hand washes the other.
Nowhere were obligations to each other clearer than between the living and the dead. Up until today, Andean families gather around their graves on the Day of the Dead to feast their lost ones with food, drink, and conversation, from gossip to prayer. Respect between people, between dead and living, and man and environment, was the basic law laid down for the Andean peasantry by a creator god in human form, Viracocha, whose only image remains here on this mountain. Tradition places his emergence here at Lake Titicaca. Long ago, so the story goes, Viracocha rose from here to create earth, sun, moon, and stars. Then, according to the myth, Viracocha created all the tribes of the Andes and taught them to live in harmony. The myth constitutes the charter document of Andean civilization.
Each tribe had its own place of emergence called Pacarina. It might be a fountain, a cave, a hill from which the ancestors of each tribe emerged, dispatched from Titicaca by Viracocha to populate the Andes. In a real sense, the Pacarina was like a deed of possession, marking from time immemorial the right of ownership of the tribe to its tribal lands. And the genius of this religious system was that the Pacarina, place of dawning, was likened to a star, and just as each star has a fixed place in the firmament in relation to others, so each tribe had its own fixed territory and could live in harmony with all the other tribes. And so in a sense, the Pacarina was literally a stargate. Here, on the vault of heaven, are written the thought forms of Andean civilization. By night, a firmament of unblemished brilliance blazes forth. Here, the Milky Way, in other places at most a brightish band in the night sky, scintillates with such intensity that its great whorls of interstellar dust appear in stunning definition, inky black and fathomless. These black clouds are named llama, condor, partridge, toad, serpent, fox.
Fox and llama, images in the Andean night skies which will be so crucial in this story and were so important to the Incas that they inscribed them on their hallowed ground.
Los incas concibieron de que este valle es sagrado por ser un reflejo en espejo de la Vía Láctea. Por ejemplo, utilizaron las formas de la naturaleza para representar las imágenes de las constelaciones andinas, como el caso de la imagen de la llama junto al pueblo de Ollanta y Tambo.
Like ancient Egyptians who saw the Nile River as an earthly Milky Way and may have laid out some of their pyramids to mirror Orion, constellation of their god Osiris, so the Incas saw their holy valley as a mirror of the Milky Way and used nature to shape constellations and black clouds, such as Hampatu, the toad. Above the town of Urubamba, the shape of a condor sets off towards the sun, rising here on solstice day.
Aquí en Pisac, la imagen de la constelación del cóndor, con las alas abiertas en actitud de llevar a los espíritus a la Vía Láctea.
To the Incas, the Milky Way and days of solstice were of paramount importance. Days when they believed a bridge connected the world above and that below. The June solstice was a day of holy ritual, because on that day the sun rose in the Milky Way and opened a bridge to the land of the gods. Likewise, on December solstice, the sun rising in the Milky Way opened the gates to the land of the ancestors, allowing the living to consult the dead. Time ruled by sun and stars. Of its importance to our ancestors we remember almost nothing.
We do everything to make it forgotten. We have digital clocks. Whereas we should know that the large pointer is the moon and the small one is the sun, and this is all taken in the 60 minutes, and that this is all taken from the sun and the moon and the stars.
But not everyone has forgotten. This is Coyuriti, an ancient sacred mountain in Peru, where each year tens of thousands of people come to collect holy water for their Christian churches. But the days of Coyuriti also commemorate an ancient Indian rite. In Western myths, the heavenly hunter Orion confronts the constellation of Taurus, whose shoulder blade is formed by the 7 stars of the Pleiades, a constellation which disappears from view for more than a month. In days gone by, the reappearance of the constellation was crucial for Andean farmers in defining their agricultural calendar for the year.
It's June the 7th, and these people have come to celebrate the rising of the Pleiades. But this date varies over long periods of time, which turns out to be a fact of crucial importance to this story, because it leads us into another time when the Andean peoples experienced the Pachacuti, the end of the world.
A Pachacuti, the end of the world. The fear for such a Pachacuti and the belief of the Andeans that they could see it written in the stars is the focus of research of American author William Sullivan. The coming of the Spanish constitutes just such a Pachacuti for the Incas and the Andes. The deluge, the end of their world. But before that, there is an earlier myth of flood and deluge, an Andean version of Noah and his ark.
In this myth, Lama tells Shepherd to take all the animals to the top of Mount Vilcacotto. Indicating the Pleiades rising over the mountain, he warns Shepherd that in exactly 1 month, the flood will come. Now, as the waters rise, the top of the mountain is so crowded with animals that Fox slips and gets his tail wet. And that's why, to this day, Fox's tail is black. In myth, towering mountains like Vilcacotto stand for the June solstice. And so now we know that what we're looking for is, just as the Yama said, the time period when the Pleiades rose exactly 1 month before the June solstice. I believe that in their myths, the ancients launched a message into the future. And they wanted to be absolutely certain that their message would be understood. And so we find again and again that they would leave us 2 clues. What happened at the June solstice and what happened at the December solstice. Now the computer shows us the skies of the past. And what we're looking for now is the time when the Pleiades first reappeared in the dawn sky exactly 1 month before the June solstice. And this is what happened. Here's the Yama, followed by the fox, and Fox's tail is beneath the horizon in the gathering dawn. And so now we know why Fox's tail is black, because this event took place in 650 AD, which the myth specifies as the era of the flood.
Around 650, archaeology shows something very ugly crept out of the bottle. For the first time, large-scale war broke out to rule the Andes for 8 long centuries. But if Sullivan is correct, the myth leaves us 2 clues. What could be seen on both the June and December solstice.
What terrible event did the Andean astronomers see in the sky? The key lies in the supreme importance of the Milky Way as a causeway connecting the living, the dead, and the gods. And this is what happened. On June solstice in 650 AD, the Milky Way no longer lay on the horizon in the path of the rising sun. And this meant that the gates to the land of the gods had slammed shut.
Myth says Viracocha turned away in sorrow and left this world. And indeed, Andean farmers remember the introduction of widespread war as a cataclysm, as it destroyed the great foundation of balance the god had laid. What Andean shamans saw was at Panchakute, an end of the world, as the bridge to the gods was gone forever. Meanwhile, the Andes fell prey to a proud and brutal state, the military rulers of Huari, who imposed harsh revenue collection and compulsory labor. Those resisting were eliminated in ritual slaughter.
These endless stone walls tell the story of the nightmare that descended on the Andes. The lords of Huari forced the farmers of this area to build them. Endless barracks like concentration camps, where Huari officials could oversee forced labor, tax collection, and the production of luxury goods for their own benefit.
The Andean highlands imploded. Tribe set upon tribe, valley upon valley. A new elite arose, warriors, whose aim it was to set themselves above the sedentary farmers and be able to perpetuate war at their expense. If farmers had identified themselves as descendants of the stars, the warriors now likened themselves to planets, free to wander amongst the stars.
Scholars maintain that the Andean people didn't know the planets. Of course, in these crystal clear skies, they're pretty hard to miss. And one chronicler even listed them all with their names, and they bore a striking resemblance to the planetary gods of Greek and Roman antiquity. There was Chaskakolior, a beautiful woman with curly hair, Venus. There was Aucha, the god of time, justice, and retribution, Saturn. There was the god of war, Aukayoch, he with enemies, Mars. Catuilia, the messenger, Mercury. And Pirua, from which the very name Peru may derive, was the king, the lord of bounty, Jupiter.
In this period, Viracocha, the god who has departed, is also seen in another aspect.
These are the remains of the Inca temple dedicated to the supreme god, Viracocha. The Spanish understood this to be an Inca word meaning fat from the sea, but the Incas just laughed at this because the word comes from an entirely different region, from the language around Lake Titicaca where the god originated. And there it means something quite different. It means tilted plain of the celestial sea. But tilted in relation to what? What it indicates is the path described by the sun's equator in relation to the plane of the Earth's equator. And possession of this knowledge was the key to understanding precession and the movement of the stars. The astronomical phenomenon of precession was the great mystery which fascinated our ancestors, and it really isn't that difficult to explain. And you remember this, the old top? The rapid spin around the axis is like the daily rotation of the Earth, but you see that there's another slower wobble on the axis itself.
One wobble of the axis takes about 26,000 years to go around. Standing on Earth, it makes the constellation seem to travel through the epochs. Appearing behind the rising sun, they change in periods of little over 2,000 years. We know them as Pisces, Aries, Taurus.
The zodiac, as we conceive it, contains 12 constellations. Did the Incas share in this point of view? Farmers in remote villages have told me that they did, that they had a system of 12 houses of the sky. And over there are the remains of 12 temples, each dedicated to one of 12 Inca royal lineages.
There was a fanfare blowing to the sun that was
The symbols are different. The meaning seems to be the same. The god Viracocha turns into the ruler of this eternal movement and becomes identified with Saturn, the planet, just as happens in Greek myths or with China's creator god Wang Di. Stern gods of justice, retribution, who measure out time and precession.
Saturn was called the father of time because it took the longest period of any planet to go around the sun. And the ancients used Saturn to track immense spans of precessional time through its conjunctions with the planet Jupiter.
For measuring that span of 26,000 years, there was this shortcut. Saturn and Jupiter conjunct every 20 years. Each conjunction occurs a third of the way through the zodiac, slightly passing by its former location. After 40 conjunctions, some 800 years, they turn back to the place of departure, a shortcut to precession for a long time unknown to us.
The Andean people clearly knew it well. Here in this temple, priests danced 40 dances, and the Incas counted tribes by units of 40. Again and again, the sacred number of 40, the key to calculating precession and symbol of eternal return, is found in ritual use.
From the Andean city of Cusco radiated 40 paths to every point of the compass, each to be walked in undeviating straight lines. Here rose a new power in the Andes, the Incas, appearing for a brief, brilliant moment in time. Their emergence is shrouded in myths. The storytellers still say that the god Viracocha himself blessed their ancestor when leaving this world, and left him his staff for the Inca to stake his claim to this world. A myth, Bill Sullivan believes, again, with a meaning.
The Incas equated their mythical ancestor Manco Cápac with the planet Jupiter. And the myth points to a conjunction of Saturn and Jupiter, and so announces to all the world that the Incas, with the blessing of Viracocha, have now come to rule the Andes.
A strong claim to power, though still well within the bounds of the symbolic language which Sullivan finds in the Andes. But for some reason, the Incas go beyond that. Something happens which makes them start behaving very differently. There is a tradition that the Inca Empire was born under the shadow of a prophecy. The year is around 1440, no more than 90 years before the Spaniards come. The Incas are just one tribe amongst many, and their valley of Cusco is being overrun by a hated foe. Their old king is in retreat. He is desperate, but not just because of enemy attack. Within 5 generations, he foretells his son Yupanqui and his generals, there will be a fatal Pachacuti, an end of times, and this time it will destroy all of the Andes. But his son, the Prince Yupanqui, is unwilling to give up. He shoves his wavering father aside and takes the lead of power in his hands.
Unlike his father, Yupanqui was not willing to accept defeat. Instead, he proposed a different idea, a revolutionary vision to create an empire of the sun that would embark on a sacred mission to rescue Andean civilization from the brink of extinction.
Chroniclers dismiss it as a fantasy. But if this prophecy indeed existed, the shock wave it caused can hardly be understood in the common context of history. Prince Yupanqui takes on a new and significant name, Pachacuti Inca, he who overturns the world himself. He seems driven by a strange sense of urgency. Starting from their narrow Cusco Valley, he and his 4 successors set on the course of expansion. In one of the most inaccessible regions of the earth, they conquer an empire, the distance from Canada to the Caribbean, or from Iceland onto the Sahara within the short span of just 80 years. In it, they abolish horrors such as cannibalism and exploitation of the farmers by the warrior class and restore peace after 8 centuries of continuous warfare. And they set themselves above all others. They call their empire the Empire of the Sun.
Pachacuti Inca couldn't just simply restore the ancient peace of Huiracocha. To favor the farmers would put him on a collision course with the warriors. Instead, he offered the warriors the prestige of participating in the creation of the Empire of the Sun. And so, the way around the warriors was lit by the imagery of the sun, outshining stars and planets alike. There was a sense of purpose, a recognition of the deep sorrow abroad in the land, as well as a sense of beauty, a joy and risk at the ever-present possibility of tragedy in every Inca undertaking. But above all, there was a powerful charisma which drew the Andean people into the orbit of Cusco. This is one of the greatest tourist attractions in the Western Hemisphere, Machu Picchu. And yet, in its day, it housed perhaps 12 to 1,500 people. Can you imagine what a real Inca city might have looked like? Unlike any empire before them, the Incas did not lavish their skills on ornate temple complexes. Instead, they built soil.
All over the Andes, the Incas imposed a rigid system in which each conquered tribe worked for the common good. Money was unknown, private property strictly limited. Instead, greatness was achieved by turning all energies to covering the Andes with terraces, irrigated fields, and an impressive system of roads.
Here, for the benefit of travelers, the Incas built a natural refrigerator. Outside, the sun is at its zenith, but inside here, it's 20 degrees cooler. The wind blows down this passage, and you can see how the Incas carved ledges in the rock, which they spanned with planks and placed the food on it. The wind blowing below and above both cooled and dried the food. In reestablishing the harmony of the age of Huiracocha, the Incas' primary concern was the restoration of bounty. To create an empire that knew no famine, the Incas built storehouses for food everywhere. Food that could be transported anywhere within days to feed starving people. Storehouses like that, where the winds that blow through this valley kept the maize dry and prevented it from rotting. And in that same spirit, the Incas strove to develop better kinds of food plants. This place is an agricultural experimentation station where the Incas took useful food crops that were adapted to lower altitudes and planted them successively higher each year at this place so that by the time it was at the highest altitude, it was ready to be planted all over the mountains.
What drove the Incas?
What did Pachacuti and his father see in the sky? Now, the Incas have been accused of manipulating and glorifying their own history. So let's take the testimony of a completely different group, the conquered tribes of Huaruchiri. According to their legends, there's a Yama in the sky who walks down the Milky Way and must drink all the water from the sea every night. If not, the world will end. And look at this. This is what Pachacuti Inca and his father saw. Just as all those years ago in 650 AD, when Fox was sinking lower, now it was the Yama's turn. But even more important was this. This is what the Andean priest astronomers saw. The path of the sun about to part company with the Milky Way. But this time, it would be the bridge to the land of the ancestors that would be washed away in the floodwaters of time.
Was this the prophecy? That the dead could no longer return to instruct the living? Was this the terrible weakness of the Incas, the certain knowledge that a cosmic catastrophe loomed imminent in the skies?
Pachacuti Inca could not stand idly by while the very portals of sacred tradition creaked towards closure on the hinge of history. If it was true that events in the sky influenced those on Earth, was it possible that the reverse could be true? Could human action alter the course of the stars? This, I believe, is how Pachacuti Inca conceived war. A war against time. For if time was merciless, then it must be stopped. I would not have carried this story further had I not come across the chronicle of a Spanish priest, Martín de Murúa, one of the few who tried to view events from the Indian side.
In this chronicle, Sullivan finds further evidence for his view. Martín de Murúa records a legend from the start of Pachacuti Inca's reign. In it, an old bearded man sounding the sacred conch shell starts endless rains threatening to drown Cusco. Pachacuti Inca seeks him out.
Now all of this may reflect an historical event, heavy rains threatening the Inca capital of Cusco. But the myth also speaks of an astronomical event. When Pachacuti Inca goes forth to meet Huiracocha, we are being told of the conjunction of the planets Jupiter and Saturn. But the real alarm bell for the Incas was that this conjunction of the planets took place in exactly the same spot as in 650 AD. 40 conjunctions had passed, and now Saturn and Jupiter occupied the same place in the stars where 8 centuries earlier they had announced the imminent collapse of the previous world.
Like all Andean peoples, Pachacuti Inca believed that events in heaven foretold what would happen on Earth. But if he changed events on Earth, could it alter the course of the stars? If he could prevent the world from sliding to further chaos and bloodshed, restore Viracocha's order on Earth, would heaven refrain from its fatal conjunctions? Could doom be averted? Martín de Murúa records what he did. He undertook a religious reform without parallel.
Pachacuti Inca transformed the city of Cusco into the navel of the earth. With the sun now the focus of religion, the Coricancha, or Pachacuti's Temple of the Sun, was clad in gold, and from here emanated 40 rays called seques to all points of the horizon, ramrod straight paths to the rising stars. Alongside these lines lay natural shrines, and each tribe in the empire was responsible for the maintenance of one of these shrines. And so, as if in a giant spiderweb, all the tribal peoples of the Andes, the descendants of the stars, remember, were bound to the sun in the center. And he instituted this, the Intihuatana, literally for tying the sun. But for tying the sun to what? For tying the solar religion to all the tribal peoples of the Andes, each tribe descended from its own star. For if the stars could not move in relation to the sun, then and only then could the war against time be won.
And Pachacuti Inca made one day paramount over all others, the day of the December solstice, the very day when the bridge to the ancestors lay open. That day, 10,000 llamas were killed and sacrificed throughout the empire. Everywhere their blood was blessed and gathered in small clay pots. Runners carried the pots to the farthest corners of the empire to cast them onto the top of each hill or mountain summit.
From everywhere in the empire, all the tribes would send delegations here to Cusco, each with 2 unblemished children. Some of these children were sacrificed here in the Coricancha, in the most solemn of all Inca rituals known as the Capacocha. As if in a great act of respiration, all the delegations were drawn into Cusco for sanctification, thence to return to their homelands with the remaining children. The meaning of the Capacocha has remained an enigma from the beginning, and yet I believe its secret lies in the meaning of the word itself. Capac, the priest astronomer king, and Hucha, a plea, the plea of the king. For it was the plea of the Inca that the sacrificed children were destined to carry to the stars. Thanks to the chronicle of the priest Morua, we even know the words of the plea. May the sun and moon remain forever young. May the earth not turn over. Ama Pachacuti. And may there be peace. But with an entire empire under control and at peace, where was the war? I believe that there was one and only one war left for the Incas to wage, and that was the war against time.
Along the seques that emanated from Holy Cusco, traversing mountains and gullies in unswerving straight lines, the children traveled back home to be sacrificed on the mountaintops. There we still find them, accompanied by their dolls. Children whose fate it was to carry the world's plea all the way up to heaven's gate.
A spellbinding resonance was established between the twin poles of horror and beauty. The prophecy of impending doom and the attempt to forestall it was the secret of the royal family and a small circle of Inca initiates. But the writing on the wall had not escaped native astronomers elsewhere. I believe that in Mexico, a similar prophecy made the Aztecs wage their own war against time, but with terror, feeding the sun with tens of thousands of sacrificial victims at a time. In struggling with a terrible vision of the future, the Incas instead drew upon the waters of sorrow rather than rage, and so they dispatched unblemished emissaries to the stars, emissaries bearing a desperate message to plead humanity's case at heaven's bar. And if this plea, carried on high by the souls of slain children, revealed flawed powers of faith, it also revealed the most terrible sorrow of all, the sense that the Creator might abandon his creation. This, I believe, was the desperate strategy the Incas employed to prevent the end of their world. But if you want to make God laugh, tell him your plans.
(1527). Much further to the north, Europeans have discovered the New World and annihilated the Aztec Empire of Mexico, unknown to the Incas. It's only a scant 8 decades after the great Pachacuti Inca overturned his world and founded the Inca Empire, the largest of its time. The fifth of the great Incas and the last of them to rule, Huayna Capac, lies dying of an unknown disease. It's the scourge of smallpox, which the Spanish have imported into the New World and now precedes them. His dying words are, so the story has it, "Then I am to be the last. The war is lost."
I believe what really shook him was the same thing that the first Inca, Pachacuti, had seen and feared. The path of the sun was separating from the Milky Way, and the entrance to the land of the ancestors was slamming shut. And this event was underscored by a unique conjunction of all 5 visible planets, an event recorded as far away as China. Venus and Mercury joined Saturn and Jupiter, along with Mars, the red planet of war. The other 4 would move on, but Mars would remain to linger in the night sky and oversee the havoc of impending doom.
The Spanish smallpox, which killed the last Inca, will slay half the population and break the spirit of the people. A terrible outburst of the phenomenon we now know as El Niño lashes the country and destroys the coastal lands. Civil war breaks out amongst pretenders, destroying what confidence the peoples have in a leadership in turmoil. Only then do the Spanish conquerors come.
This is all that remains of the Temple of the Sun, the heart of the Inca Empire. These walls were once clad in gold to reflect the rays of the rising sun, but the Spanish conquerors tore it all off. And now its remains lie dwarfed by the Dominican monastery built upon it. Nothing better symbolizes the fleeting brilliance and tragic demise of the Empire of the Sun.
There was a fanfare blowing to the sun that was floating on the breeze.
The Andean shaman was rooted out, tortured, mutilated, beaten to death, dismembered, burned alive. The great river of knowledge that had informed every aspect of Andean life was reduced to a trickle and then to dust. The extirpators groomed informers, little men with little grudges, or frightened men who gathered at the priest's black skirts. As the voice of the Andes was silenced, it left a legacy, stories, coded messages, myth.
All in a dream, all in a dream.
The Incas strove to create peace and justice, to unite the warring tribes, to create bounty and beauty. They built a road system the distance of London to Tashkent, or from Hudson's Bay to Havana, and they covered the Andes with terraces and irrigated fields. This is an accomplishment unparalleled by China or Rome or any of the world's great empires, because the Incas achieved all this in 80 or 90 years, in one tremendous burst of energy. Why? Perhaps we now know.
Sol radiante de los Andes, tú que caminas por el mundo, ¿por qué marchitas florecillas sin que lleguen a dar fruto?